Well, welcome everybody to the first Transition Network and Resilience.org webinar. This is a very exciting and technologically staggering event, and it's a real honour to have this first inaugural webinar with two of my heroes, with Joanna Macy and with Chris Johnson. So I will introduce them in a minute. The shape for this hour is that, first of all, I've asked Chris and Joanna to talk for about 15 minutes between the pair of them. And then I had a couple of questions, and I've had questions people have sent in. But this is also very much an interactive webinar, so please, as we go through, do send me in your questions, and we will try and get to as many of those as we can. So, Joanna Macy is an eco-philosopher, Buddhist scholar, systems theorist, deep ecologist. She has had 5 decades, I nearly said 5 centuries there, that was wrong. I mean 5 decades of activism in terms of peace, justice, ecology, anti-nuclear work. She is the creator of the Work That Reconnects, the tools and the whole way of looking at things of the Work That Reconnects, which is a very powerful framework, as I can attest, having done a workshop with her a few years ago that was really quite stunning. She's the author of Coming Back to Life, World as Love, World as Self, and she lives in Berkeley, California, near her children and her grandchildren. And we're very honoured to have you here, Joanna. Thank you so much for making your time. And Chris Johnson has had many years of experience as a doctor, as a specialist in addictions. He was a senior teaching fellow at Bristol University Medical School, developed a pioneering behavioural medicine training program, was the first, I think, person who took the NHS to court for overworking trainee students or something, which is a story that he tells in his book Find Your Power, which I highly recommend, recently republished by Permanent Publications, and has just moved to Scotland. And the pair of them are the authors of Active Hope, How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy. By the way, I'm Rob Hopkins from Transition Network, and my role here is just to facilitate and ask some questions. So welcome to everybody who is here. I've seen people who are logging onto this from all around the world, Costa Rica, all corners, people logging onto this. So thank you everybody attending for making your time this Thursday to join us. So I'd like to ask Chris and or Joanna, I don't know quite how they've decided to carve up their speaking slot, but it's a great honour to invite one, other, both, whatever, to address this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob.
Yes. Well, this is a very exciting moment too, particularly since I had a little technical snafu on my end here in California, but the kind fates were with us. I'm so happy to be able to talk with Chris about the book that came out through our joint efforts. What a wonderful co-author this man is. And it built on 23 years of working together, 24, since we first engaged in a 10-day intensive in Scotland back in 1989. So Chris has been joining me in this work and a whole network of facilitators. And we realized that although there's been books and websites about it, that we have been learning something over the years that we wanted to be able to share with our brother, sister humans who are facing an ever more alarming state of affairs, looking at the sustainability politically, ecologically, and morally, and in our hearts. How do we keep on going? And we have practiced it so much. Hear that? Oh. So active hope. How to face the mess we're in without going crazy. And Rob, is that what we're talking about?
It is. I'm just wondering, am I the only person who's hearing an echo?
There's been a kind
I'm not hearing an echo, but I did hear you typing, Rob.
Okay, that's fine.
That was it. It sounded like
yes, that's what we're talking about, Joanna. Thank you.
I was talking with Chris the other day, and about what I might share of many things in my heart, mind, as we face together, and particularly those connected with the transition culture that I have such pleasure in watching and referring people to and being nourished by. So I think what I want to say is how grateful I am for some recent learnings that are really intrinsic to the situation that we're in. So here are two. One is that in our book, we begin it by looking at the ways we view the situation that we're in today. And we call it the three stories. There are three lenses or versions of reality by which we make sense of what is happening in our history at this moment. And these three are business as usual, and by which we see that would define in terms of our political economy, which is an industrial growth economy, and that is fateful indeed, because it grows only not in terms of wisdom or productivity or health, in terms of one factor only, which is, as you know, corporate profits and market share. And when you try to maximize just one variable in a system, it goes out of balance and into runaway. So the second story is, which is, they're all real, is when you look at, it's mostly held by the scientists and activists, and they peel back the rug a little bit and look underneath what the industrial growth society is costing us. And it is costing us the world, the ecological systems, the political and cultural systems, the climate. And David Corton calls this, and we took the name, the Great Unraveling. So that's the second story. And it's dismal indeed. And it too is on an exponential growth. But there's the third story. And that's what those listening in are aware of. And that's the great turning, the shift, the transition to a life-sustaining society. What I'm grateful for is seeing that we at every point have a choice between these realities in terms of what we put ourselves behind, what we want to take part in. And when you think of it in terms of that choice that can present itself to you at any moment, then even in the midst of bad news, you know that you can place yourself in the countless opportunities that are growing daily in ways that we can take part in the healing of our world and build sustainable systems right there in our community and work for policies that take life into account. And at that moment, that's the other thing I'm so grateful for in this book, is recognizing the power of choice, that what we are in terms of our awareness, what is distinctive about being human, is that we can choose. We have a choice of where we put our mind, where we put our energy and our intention. That's quite remarkable, as a matter of fact. And we keep in the book, I love it that my co-author, Chris, who is not in Buddhist practice, agreed, and as a matter of fact, he suggested that we keep two terms that come from Buddhism in the original language, Sanskrit, because there's no equivalent in English. One is Bodhisattva, and that's the part of us, that inner knowing, as well as being the hero in the Buddhist tradition, is that part of us that knows that we are intricately and inextricably interconnected, and there is no private salvation. And so we are growing into an ever-increasing recognition of our unity with all beings and with this planet. And the other word is bodhicitta, which is the intention of the bodhisattva. That is your intention within each of us. We're born with it, and we can grow it, which is to take part, to act for the welfare of all beings, to walk out of that little prison self of egocentricity and move out and open to your yearning to take part in a bigger drama, a bigger game, a larger beauty, the larger life, which is available to us at any point in our actions to serve life on earth. So those are the two things. Bodhisattva, bodhicitta, we're alive now. We can choose the story we're in at every moment. And when you think of that as a choice, it helps me not get preachy when I talk to people who are not quite in the same optic that I am, who might be caught in the great unraveling or the business as usual optic, that's all they see. Simply not to say you're wrong, but rather to say, oh, yeah, but you can look at it this way. There's another story. Look at this story. And these three stories are not something you wish for. There's something going on at this moment.
Wonderful. Wonderful to hear you speak, Joanna. And just to say that one of the things I love about being involved in this whole book process was Joanna and I spent over 100 hours of conversation in writing this book together. And our desire and intention was to share the things that we had found most helpful in helping us face all that. So when I talk about face all that, there's so much to face: climate change, depletion of resources, extinction of species. And one of the themes that I found most helpful is exactly as Joanna was saying, that this thing about recognizing that we have choice about the story. And I love the idea that we can take part in like an adventure story. Adventure stories often begin from, it seems like everything has gone kind of pear-shaped and the main characters don't have much chance. But what makes the story is the main characters rising to the challenge. And what Joanna and I wanted to do was to look at, well, what helps us rise to the challenge? What helps us rise to the challenge when we might feel defeated or might even seem hopeless or seems beyond us? And I love this word that Joanna has introduced, bodhicitta, because I recognize it in myself and I recognize it in people that I work with in workshops, people who've never really come across any particular Buddhist ideas or any other faith tradition, but they have a deep desire and intention to do their bit for life on earth. And we need a word for that. We need a word for that deep desire of like, yeah, I want to play my part. I have the desire, I have the intention. Maybe I'm not quite sure what my role is, but I know that I want to do something. And so what we also wanted to do was look at, well, how do you grow that feeling? How do you help it get stronger? And so the book takes people just as the workshops of the work that we connect to, the book takes people on a strengthening journey. It's a transformative process. So the idea that working through this journey, it's not just one thing that strengthens you, but it's the combination of different elements along the way. And in particular, something that I have been so enriched by is this spiral of the work that we connect. It's a journey around 4 different areas, and the first is just to begin with gratitude. That whenever you're struggling, just take a moment to breathe in and remember what supports you to be alive, what you draw upon. There's this lovely idea that gratitude is a social emotion. It points you outwards beyond yourself to those that you receive from. And when you feel gratitude, you know you're not alone. So I think of it as like remembering your root system, but also there's such an important reframing of the distress or anguish, when you look at what's going on and you feel your heart sink or the guts tighten up, that to see that as a normal reaction, and more than that, even a healthy reaction, that when you're facing disturbing realities, it's normal and healthy to feel disturbed. But also there's a larger story here. There's there's what you feel, but there's also what's the story you tell yourself about what those feelings, where they come from. And I love this idea that we can see ourselves like the nerve cells of the planet, that when we feel pain on behalf of something elsewhere, people elsewhere or parts of our planet elsewhere, that there's suffering, tragedy, that pain is an alerting signal. And when you feel that pain, it can be like a wake-up call that activates a response. And so then I think of the first 2 parts of the spiral as looking at what is. So it's looking at both what we love and what we appreciate and feel grateful for, and also what horrifies us, alarms us. But then the second 2 parts of the spiral are very much about resourcing our response. And so the next one is seeing with new eyes, opening to a whole different way of seeing, opening to inspiring perspectives. And we've really spent a big chunk of the book looking at what we call the 4 discoveries. The 4 discoveries that when you can look at something in a different way, can discover a different way of looking at ourselves, a different way of not just perceiving, but also experiencing our power to make a difference. Also, the different way of looking at the community that we're part of. It's not just the people around us, but we're part of a whole biological community of life on Earth. And then also a different way of viewing time, this idea of we can inhabit a larger timescape, just like a landscape is the area of land we see around us. A timescape is the area of time that we consider in our decision making. And when we feel part of an amazing planet that's 4.5 billion years old, or a stream of life that's 3.5 billion years old, it opens up a completely different sense of possibility, which we write about. But also we want to support, it's okay opening to new perspectives. It's like, well, where do we take that? So the final part of the spiral is going forth. It's looking at how we play our role, how we find out what our role is, how we catch an inspiring vision, and how we dare to believe that it's possible, looking at what supports that sense of possibility. And in particular, kind of guiding people through a process that starts with visioning, but then also looks at how we move from a larger vision to very concrete steps that we can take in our own lives, and how we sustain ourselves in that process so that we don't burn out. I'm aware of our 15 minutes. Rob, you were going to suggest that we talk, and so I think we've used that up. We've used up our initial time just sharing a bit about what we love in this book. It's got a different cover in Australia, but I suppose that's what we wanted to offer is when facing all that's happening in the world, what helps us give our best response, and this idea of a strengthening journey. And also really encourage people, you can read the book alone and get benefit from that, but if you read it with others and really wanting to support this idea, as a lot of transition groups are already doing, that they're having book clubs around this book, and we're developing resources to support shared journeys of reading. This is a way of having a workshop, and the book is just a guide in that. Over to you, Rob.
Oh, can I chime in a minute?
Sure, Joanna.
I am so glad that you took a moment to talk about the 4 discoveries, because these are like an opening gateway into a larger field that keeps opening every time one does a practice, thinks about it, builds it into the life of your daily activities. And the last one you mentioned was that larger time frame. We call it sometimes deep time work. But that has grown for me and a lot of the folks around me in this work, a sense of the being supported by, connected, reconnecting with the generations that have gone before us and the generations that are coming after. In this, because one of the dumbest and cruelest things about the industrial growth society is how it is trashing both the past and the future, and mortgaging the future for our profits and gains in this moment. The sense that we grow through this active hope is that we're not alone here. We not only have each other who are joining us in our transition town work and in the many forms that the healing of our work takes them, this immune response on the part of planet Earth, but we are also in a very real way, when we open our minds to it, accompanied by, surrounded by the past and future generations, that we can be inspired by them and feel their counsel. They're there like a cloud of witnesses, and that helps us let go of some of that tension and know that I can wake up glad for the next 1,000 years of healing. I can be there for the long haul. I can rest into the immense support that is there for us in being part of the journey of humanity and planet Earth.
Some questions coming in, and if people would like to, this is your opportunity, if you're listening, to post some questions in the little box to the side there, and we will try and get to as many of those as we can. I wanted to start first of all with a question. So the name of the book is Active Hope, and hope is a word that we see used quite a lot at the moment, and I wonder whether, do you think there's a danger that the concept of hope can mean that we sometimes lock the real and deeply challenging and unsettling, troubling stuff into a box?
You know, I never used hope before.
And with the possibility, you know, that whole, you know, that we lock the possibility that we might actually lose away rather than facing it, and so hope can become sort of commoditized. Like around the time of Copenhagen, the COP15, there was the whole thing about Copenhagen, which the Coca-Cola adverts at the time talked about Copenhagen. You know, what's the difference between hope and an active hope? You know, you use that term hope with an active on the front, and I wonder if you could tell us what maybe the difference is between the two. Joanna?
Well, you know, I was laughing because I used to say in the early years of my activism and of doing this work even, hope is a killer. Watch out. You know, I saw it as wishful thinking. I saw it as some kind of a Pollyanna-ish looking on the bright side that could distract you, take you out of the present moment. What's been exciting to me, and I'm grateful for also with Chris, in this endeavor of ours, is realizing that, hey, wait a minute, hope isn't something that you possess, it's something, not something you have, it's something you do. You're a verb, after all, as Buckminster Fuller said, I seem to be a verb. So are we all when we really get cracking. And hope is in our action itself, so that we see it in what we choose to say and do, and in the very opening to our intention to take part. What do you want to say to that, Chris?
Hooray! And agreement. I love what you've just said, that hope is in our action itself. And I love the idea of active hope as kind of like a martial art of planetary self-defense. A bit like kind of Tai Chi. You know, Tai Chi is not something you have. Tai Chi is something you do. But it's also something you can learn to get better at. And it's not that there's one set of moves with active hope, but all of us can look at the way we do it and look at, can we get better at that? Can we get better at doing active hope? And this idea of strengthening our, not just capacity, but also our desire. It's these two things, how we strengthen our desire and capacity to act for life on Earth. And I saw the question out there, how do we reach people deep in business as usual, in the majority of people? And I'm just aware there was a big study done by the Mental Health Foundation, and they looked at how people feel about what's happening in the world, and the commonest feeling was powerlessness, was the feeling of, well, there's nothing I can do. And that's what we need to shift, and that's where, I mean, I've learned so much from Joanna through working with her for 24 years. But this question, like, well, how do we find our power? And one of the things is looking at what blocks it. And one of the things that blocks it is when we get caught in this calculation of, have I got a chance or not? Is there a point of me trying or not? Am I hopeful or not? And we want to look at hope in a different way, not as in, am I hopeful, but what do I hope for? What do I hope for? None of us know what's going to happen in the future, but we can know what we'd like to happen. And if we focus on what our preferred possible version of the future is, and then we're active in moving that way, that's what we mean by active hope. It's like saying, you know, there's a zillion different timelines, there's a zillion different ways that the future will go, and we don't know which one will happen, but we can vote. We can vote for the one we'd like to happen by putting our lives behind the story of that occurring. And that's what we mean by active hope. It's saying there's 3 steps. One is take a clear view of current reality. You know, in order to get to where you want to go, you need to start from where you are. It's not about brushing aside the hugely disturbing state of affairs, as Joanna said, the ever more alarming state of affairs. It's taking that in, but then it's saying, okay, there's loads of different ways this can go. What do I hope will happen, and how can I be active in making that more likely?
So you can have active hope even if you're feeling pessimistic. I love it. Here in America, you know, people have been quite worshipful of hope, as if, you know, being hopeful is a sign of your popularity and competence, and, you know, your belief in our manifest destiny, and that we can, it's very tiresome. You feel then, oh, if I'm not hopeful, what's the point of acting? So we want to free people. You don't have to have hope. All you have to do is care enough, and then you act. Then you see what you want to, then you act. And that in itself is active.
Yeah, I was at a conference last week where somebody on a panel said, It said, we are halfway through a Great Depression, which seemed extraordinary. How on earth do you know that? Do you have clairvoyant powers, or are you incredibly optimistic? And it seemed like the worst kind of hope, you know. Sort of, you get this sense here often with the economy that basically the economy will get better if enough of us believe it's going to. It becomes like a faith healing on the economy, you know. I'm going to ask you a question that Mark Wingate has sent in, which I thought was very interesting. So he says, there's a growing feeling that addressing climate change trumps, say, the local economy. How can we continue to work on a local scale when the urgency of more global work makes our local work almost moot? Chris?
I love the saying, move from they should to I will. And so it's kind of, and I think that's one of the things with climate change. It's very easy to get stuck on, well, they should do this, they should do that, they should do this. And if we're really going to inhabit the story of the Great Turning, it's about us playing our role in that. And I think this kind of idea of think global but act local, I don't see an either-or between addressing climate change and supporting a local economy. It's more about, as the transition movement is all about, really, how do we relocalize our economy in a way that we reduce our dependence on oil. And this is completely about resilience. That resilience involves recognizing the vulnerabilities, that if we stay as hooked on fossil fuels as we are, we're putting ourselves in this double disaster of both feeding climate change and also making the energy crash just that much more difficult when it comes. And we're going to have some kind of weaning ourselves off fossil fuels. And so if we strengthen our local economies, and I'm just so impressed by some of the things that some of the local transition initiatives have been doing. For example, like in Lewis, the transition group I visited quite recently, they've teamed up with a local brewery to turn this brewery building into a power station energized by the sun. And this is I love this idea of beautiful actions. Beautiful actions are ones that serve ourselves and our world at the same time. And the more that we can align personal interests, local interests, and planetary interests, the more we can look for synergies, for ways that it's that thing about the triple return, that it's not just a personal financial return, but it's also a social return and an ecological return on investment. That's the direction that we need to be moving in.
Thank you. And another question for Joanna, which Sophie Banks, who you know, Joanna, who's one of the transition trainers here, set up transition training. She said in many groups, in transition as elsewhere, a lot of transition groups, there's a lot of resistance to doing process work, to spending time looking on the inner state, especially looking at feelings and those kind of things. So do you have any tips for people who can see their group needs this kind of work but are meeting objections, or stories from people who have successfully supported a group to stretch its comfort zone into this territory?
The importance of, I'm increasingly struck, particularly over here in the U.S., with the absolute crucial importance of truth speaking. Because when you look at the political scene, it seems just awash in prevarication and deception and delusion when you look at what is coming out of the mouths of politicians and media people. So that to come to, there's a great urgency for people to get in the habit and experience the power of truth-telling. And there's no demarcation line saying, well, this is the truth about what the politicians ought to do, and this is the truth about what I see and feel. It's one response. Each one of us is an expert on what it is like to be living on an endangered planet. And we have the chance to speak that, because when we speak what our deepest response is, that builds an understanding of what, not only what we're experiencing, it allows us to hear from the others in the group, and allows us to open our eyes wider and our heart minds more open to what is in our collective awareness in this time. And we can, this awareness of the suffering, the mental suffering, and the emotional suffering of people at every place in the power spectrum helps us overcome our timidity, our fear, even our power. Oh, it's just little me worrying, nobody else is worrying. As you do this work, you realize that you're walking into a very large terrain, and it comes into focus, and it gives you not only courage but compassion in talking with the people in every walk of life. And we learn not to be duped by the face and appearance that people wear, their look of having it under control, that they are sharing that these feelings are very, very widespread. I hesitated there because I was thinking whether to mention we have the Parsifal exercise, where we go out and talk to people, interviewing people on the street or in the laundromat or on the bus station as to what they think are the major problems in our world today. And people there are really eager to talk. And you find that they're sharing the same feelings that you've been if you've taken the time to sit together, even a simple open sentences exercise, and you listen to what, not only what the other person's saying, but what's coming out of your own mouth. You listen to the person you most need to hear, which is in yourself. And then you can help other people listen to the most important voice for them, which is inside themselves. And gradually we begin to build not only truth-telling, but trust. We can offer processes. Sophie is beautiful at this, of doing something quite unchallenging, you know. It doesn't sound woo-woo, touchy-feely. Just asking people what they love about being alive, or what breaks their heart about what's happening to our world today. You know, people, you don't have to say this is an experiential process. Just sit down almost with anybody. And people want to say that. And when they say what's breaking their heart about what's happening to our society or happening to our natural world, they break into that bodhisattva heart that's in everybody. All of us come out of the web of life. All of us are going to go back into it. We have this little span where we want to be as alive as we can. And it's that coming alive that can save us in this shut down, fearful, hiding out society, don't you think?
Thank you very much. We've a question which I'll ask Chris, which as you know, you do a lot of workshops around finding your power and around the work that reconnects. He says, how do we reach people deep in business as usual, or the great unraveling, i.e. the vast majority of people in rich countries? You know, how do we mainstream these tools and resources in such a way they get beyond the usual suspects, as it were?
Yes. Just to start by saying, well, what a brilliant question. You know, it sounds a simple question, but it's such an important one. And some questions I won't have a snappy answer for. I've got things that I can say, But I think just holding the question and revisiting and coming back to it is as important as any answer. And I'd say that first of all, also that there's more than one answer, and that any important question you need to tackle from lots of different angles. So one of the places I'd start with is look at the people who are already enthusiastic, but also get subject to what I think of as activist erosion. You know, people get burnt out, they give up, they get worn out, they get disillusioned. And how do you keep the spark alive in those who are already awake to what's happening and are concerned about it? And that's where I personally have found so much benefit from the work that reconnects. It's one of the reasons why I'm still an activist 3 decades later, you know, from when I first started getting involved in this kind of thing. It's one of the things that's helped me going. So, okay, so that's the first answer, is look at how, I think of it as, just as we look at sustainability of soil, we need to look at sustainability of activism, sustainability of ourselves. But I'd also say that there's a model around social diffusion. Everett Rogers, he looked at lots of social innovations and what helped them spread. And he had this model that he talked about. There's about 15% of people who are early adopters, who pick something up and they develop a kind of workable model. And when they've got something that's workable, that attracts in the next 30% or so of people. And when the next 30% of people have come on board, then you've got another 30% of people who will be more likely to follow. And then there will always be people who will be sort of stuck in opposition. And kind of what the Everett Rogers work suggests is develop good prototypes of things that work well and support the early adopters to do that, which is a lot of what the transition work is about. But once you fashion things that really do seem to make a difference, like the transition streets and some of the kind of you know, some of the different transition initiatives, then be more outward reaching. And I learn a lot from addictions recovery groups. I spend a lot of time working in the addictions recovery field, and one saying they have in Alcoholics Anonymous is the most important person in the room is the newcomer. And so for all groups to look at how they welcome people who are coming for their first time. If somebody coming for the first time to a meeting has a good experience at that meeting, they're more likely to come back. And so that way you build a kind of like a more of an energy coming into a movement, rather than what can also happen is that people can get into kind of cliques of people that they know, and new people can come in and can feel a bit left out. But I think the third thing I'd say, and we had a whole chapter about it in our book, is about how we maintain enthusiasm, and it's through finding a different story or a new story about what it is to have a good life. And one of the things we mentioned was some of the work I did in Bristol. I set up something called the Bristol Happiness Lectures, which was looking at a common hunger. People want to be happy, but the dominant story of happiness is leading us astray. This idea that you need more stuff, you know, that happiness is what happens when you have a complete picture of all the things. Think of it as a picture model of happiness, that smiley face surrounded by all the things that you need to make you smile. As opposed to this idea of happiness, I think there's more of a sequence. And I think of adventure stories. You know, adventure stories don't usually start in happy places, but what makes for it a satisfying story, a kind of like a heart-feeding story, something that meets deep needs, is the way groups of people together face the reality of something incredibly disturbing, and they come together to give their best response. And that's what you see in Harry Potter, that's what you see in Lord of the Rings. But also, it's like the ingredients of a good story are very similar to the ingredients of a good life. That if we can have that sense of, okay, the beginning of the story is disturbing, horrifying, you know, and we may doubt that we will make it, but that doesn't stop us giving it our best shot. It doesn't stop us coming together in small groups. And if what we do is people look at us and they say, God, they seem to be having somehow You know, there's an aliveness in them that I'm not experiencing in myself. That it becomes attractive, and that's why I love this idea of these three stories. You know, the first story of the business as usual, it's a boring story. It's a chasing after getting to the top, climbing the ladder higher than anyone else, all very competitive and me. But it sets people against each other, and it's very bad for relationships. The story of the great unraveling has a lot of evidence behind it. You know, our world does seem to be falling apart, but as Joanna so beautifully says, if we let that story, we don't have to let that story have the last word. And so the great turning takes those stories as saying, well, that is happening, but we can give an enlivening response to it. And when we give an enlivening response to it, it actually re-energizes us. It's like we find a level of aliveness that just isn't there in those other stories. And then what we do starts to become attractive, and people say, you know, what are they on? I'd like some of that too. And there's loads more answers too. And Joanna, you may have something more to add on this. How do we pull more people into what we're doing?
You know, I remember going to church as a child, and I was enjoying this service, and then listening to the minister say, well, why aren't there more people here? You know, I think we can, then we're all supposed to go out and proselytize. I think that we can waste ourselves a little bit in efforts to, on the one hand, think that we're few, and we're not. We just don't see all the people around us who are working for life on earth. There are people in every walk of life, and even in the government and the military, I know that, who are quietly doing the best they can, even if it involves, and often involves, sabotage. You know, there are people. So we can get a little distracted, I think, about thinking that we're not as overpoweringly numerous as we'd like to see it more. If you have, recruit as some of your friends the trees. Boy, thank you for being there, tree. You're part of the great turning. You're putting out some oxygen that I can breathe. You know, it's a little bit falling into the mindset of the industrial growth society, that stuff-based view of the world. Sometimes something is about to change, particularly when it has to do with human consciousness awareness, that often at the time when things look just the bleakest and we've seen just the fewest and the odds seem just the worst, that things are about to turn and open. You know, I think it was Teddy Goldsmith who said in his book, The Way, there is nothing that looks more powerful and more unconquerable and permanent than a civilization on the eve of its collapse. So we have something so exquisite as the transition movement, or the work that reconnects, or countless things that are happening. And let's not poor mouth ourselves too much.
There's a very practical question that's just come from Jen Fila, who says, how can I earn a living doing the work that reconnects when I'm living in a society based on business as usual?
It's very hard. Yeah, don't expect to. Yeah. There are two answers come to my mind right away. One is the Gandhian notion of bread labor, that you have a part of your life where you're earning your rent and food money, the essentials, and that's your bread labor. movement for a new society started out that way. I mean, they all took to caning chairs so that they could earn so on. And then you have your work for the world, your work for a new society. So that's one way to look at it. Another is, of course, the growing fascination and interest in examples of the gift economy. And that you can, don't expect to get rich doing the work that reconnects, but you can blend it. Let's hope that you can blend it with what you're doing to put food on the table.
Thank you. And Hilary Jennings sent us in a question on Twitter, which was, Joanna and Chris have worked this way for years. Do they detect signs of a shift? What, if anything, is surprising them? Chris?
Well, one thing that wasn't here 10 years ago was the transition movement. And I remember talking, I was a kind of invited guest speaker with you, Rob, back in 2006 when we had the unleashing of Transition Town Totnes. And at that time, you know, it was something that hadn't really happened before. And one of the things I remember saying at that time was, you know, maybe this will be in the future, people will look back and see this as, you know, like a great beginning, or like there'll be stories told. You know, it's like that idea of seeing ourselves as part of a much, much larger story. And we don't know what will happen from what we do. But in terms of the shifts that, yeah, I've seen, I mean, there is one. It's like there are two currents happening at the same time. On the one hand, there all the numbers about climate change just seem to be getting worse and worse. And whereas in the past we talked about climate change in the future tense of if we don't do something, this will happen, now we're seeing it happen. We're seeing the weather weirdness all around the world. And for maps of Australia, they've even developed they've had to have a new colour on the temperature maps because it's never got so hot within, you know, living within recorded memory before. So that's one really, really disturbing shift. That is the great unravelling, and it is happening. And also I think of books like Blessed Unrest describing and mapping out this incredible, rich tapestry of response all around the world that we can't see. And as Joanna says, it's so difficult to kind of see so much of what is happening because it's not really covered on mainstream media. But I know that there are transition groups all around the world that weren't there 10 years ago. And I love the transition movement. I love the word transition. You know, we are on the way to somewhere else, and we need to support each other in that. And that whole transition journey has lots of different elements. It's not just one thing. And I think that the work that reconnects and the work of the approach of active hope is just, I suppose, our hope, well, certainly my hope, is that it's something that supports. It's there as a resource and a strengthening journey to support this much larger transition process. And I don't know, you know, what the numbers are. And in some ways, I don't care, because in some ways I kind of think that the shift that I'm most in touch with is the shift inside myself and in the people I see around me. And it's kind of like, how do we keep that alive? How do we keep ourselves on this and in this story? And I really like what you said, Joanna, about the thing about, you know, how come there's not more people here? Maybe it's also just recognizing that, you know, this shift, it's like saying, well, how can I step further into it myself? How can I live more into this story of the great turning? And when we do that for ourselves and the people around us, there is a kind of infectiousness that spreads from that. I don't know how much that answers that question, or whether what you'd like to add, either of you.
Well,
one of the things that I just love what you say, and there is, well, one of the things that's striking me that I'm seeing is how swiftly spreading is the notion that the earth is alive, and that deep ecological perception is becoming more and more every day for more and more people. People, particularly those who work close to the earth, but those who start doing any activism at all. And another thing that's striking me is how art and poetry, those awareness of putting into art form and literary form and song, they're becoming stronger to me, more important in gatherings of people, in the work that reconnects, in our being able to express both the immensity of our grief and outrage for what is going on, and also the immensity of our love for the chance to be alive on this beautiful planet. And that the conceptual expository formulations of do this, do that, set it all out, there's your blueprint. More and more people are turning to a deep, deep wellsprings of the expressions of the right hemisphere of the brain, you can say, which is absolutely intrinsic to and necessary to a deep consciousness shift, where we're breaking free of old ways of seeing and saying.
Thank you very much. Well, this time has absolutely flown past, and it feels like we've only just got started, and we could go on for many, many hours, but we did say to everybody this would be an hour-long event, and we've only just scratched the surface of all the questions that everybody has sent in. So thank you so much, everybody, for participating and for sending those in. This is the first time that we've done this, and the first time we've used this medium, this webinar software platform provided by resilience.org. So we'd really appreciate if you could give us any feedback on how it was for you being in the audience and listening and attending. If you could just leave us some comments, that'd be fantastic. I'd like to send thanks very much to Post Carbon Institute, to resilience.org, to Desiree, to Sim and Kristen for enabling this to happen, and particularly to Joanna and to Chris. If you'd like to find out any more about Joanna's work, joannamacy.net is the place to go, and if you want to find out more about Chris's work, then chrisjohnston.info is the place to find out. And if you've wandered in here not knowing anything about transition, have a look at transitionnetwork.org, where you will find a transition nearby, where you can enter your address, find out what's happening near you. So once again, I'd like to thank Chris, to thank Joanna. This has been a real honour and a real privilege. Thank you so much for gracing our inaugural webinar, and thank you very much. Goodbye, and enjoy the rest of your day.